And welcome to this week's Mailbox, where we go through some of the more interesting comments that have appeared on my channel from the last week. And it's a very mixed bag this week with a number of things, some of them actually quite weird. So, first of all, in terms of where the mailbox, if it's the first time you've seen this, what we do is a little thing at the beginning, which may not carry on for that much longer, but still, which is to identify where the mailbox is. And the winners from last week are here, saying, indeed, it is Valiant's Keep in Borean Tundra. I couldn't help, though, with saying something about this comment here. It says, also, how can you explain your frankly chilling way of pronouncing the word elite? I'm often finding myself covering the ears of nearby children whenever you're speaking about killing elite mobs. How on earth would you pronounce that word? And I know, and we're going to come to this as well at the end of the video, there are words that are pronounced differently in different English-speaking countries, or indeed different parts of the same English-speaking country. I have never, as long as my arse looks south, I have never heard anyone pronounce elite in any other way, no matter where they come from. How would you even pronounce that differently? I need to know. I need to know how that can be pronounced any other way, because I am now curious. Anyway, this week's mailbox, if you can identify this, so what you need to do is you need to say which zone it's in, but also the specific locale. Okay, so you just need to say what the place name is on the map and which zone it is in. And that's this week's. Right, let's get on to this week's little comments, though. Now, there was an introductory one. So I was saying, by the way, about the mailbox. So I'm running out of places to do. Not that I've done every single mailbox in the game, but some of them are just too obvious. I mean, the last week's one I thought was a little bit too easy. So I'm sort of running out, and at some point we'll probably just leave it there. But someone had a great idea, actually. It says you could take engineering. Well, I won't take engineering, but I do have a character with engineering. And place your own mailboxes when you run out of existing ones. I had not thought of that. That's actually a really good idea. I may do that for a few more weeks once I've exhausted the ones I think I can do here, which is coming very, very soon. But I may well give that a go. That was a stunning idea. Apart from anything else, it allows me to then place it so that I'm not in line of sight of distinguishing NPCs. The names of which I still wish I could get rid of, even when I get rid of the UI, the names of NPCs above their heads still remain, which annoys the hell out of me. There used to be an add-on you could use for taking like screenshots that would remove them, but that doesn't seem to be supported anymore. If anyone knows of another add-on or system, then let me know about that one, because that annoys me. Anyway, so first one. I'm missing a question here. I'll have to go back and find it at some point. But well, we're talking about Hakeeli's idea of designing a raid around the idea that we must stop the turtles getting to the water. And someone came up with a genius idea, is it? Says they could do it like another Plants vs. Zombies minigame. Now, if you don't remember that, I think, when was that? Was that in Wrath of the Lich King? I can't remember. But you did it, and that's where the sunflower pet came from. I like that, actually. It's a long time ago. I'm pretty sure it must have been Wrath of the Lich King, because I seem to remember it was before I quit the game. But anyway. Except you are using various crabs and seagulls to prevent them from reaching the ocean. Knowing Blizz, they would probably have you lose rep with the Tortolas for doing it, though. No. But that is a great idea. That is... I would like them to actually... I'm being quite serious as well. That would actually be good. They've done the Plants vs. Zombies things you've already said. That was quite a popular little piece of content. It didn't last that long. But then again, it can't have taken that much development time to produce it as well. This one sounds ideal. You know, the turtles reaching the water has become the meme of BFA. The meme to beat all of the memes. They absolutely need to cash in on this. Well, not cash in literally, but, you know, get in on it as Blizzard and actually to do that minigame. I am totally serious. I would absolutely do that. I don't do a lot of their super casual stuff. Like I didn't do the... what was the stuff in the last expansion? Chromie stuff. I didn't do any of that in Legion or anything like that. I don't usually do that sort of stuff unless I want to spend a ridiculous amount of time in the game, which, of course, I certainly don't this expansion. But I would do that, and I don't even care if there's a reward for it. There should be a pet, of course. A pet turtle. We've got enough pet turtles, but, you know, a special one. Anyway, next one is talking about the Azerite system. It says, honestly, they should just remove the whole system at this point. Just say 8.1 bandage patch, 370 loot for everyone, then have another developer team working on 8.2, rework of the whole system, removing Azerite armor and bringing back in normal helm, shoulders and chest pieces, because honestly, this system has defeated itself with every fix they try out. Now, there's two things here. First of all, the first bit, it's impossible. They'll never do that. They couldn't even do it, even if someone very high up decided to do this, like the executives of Blizzard, because you're basically talking about effectively kicking a load of people off their jobs, and then suddenly magically finding some other people. Well, there's no need for that. So that could never happen, and they'll never do it independently as a team, because it makes them look stupid if it's like saying, right, we've completely messed this expansion up, which I don't really believe is true. I think there are things that they shouldn't have done and they should have known better. I wouldn't put it as strongly as they've completely messed up the expansion. I think that would be going too far. But this system, yes, is certainly not working, and they won't make it work, but they will never sort of absolutely squash it. Apart from the fact, as I say, now that it's live, it just makes them look stupid. We know they don't do that sort of thing anyway, because like the GCD changes, for example, when it became clear that they were going to have to put in a lot more time than they initially thought, because that's a classic example of something where they thought, oh yeah, we're just going to do this thing, it's not actually that much development time, it's easy, and then realised it was going to take a lot of development time to do it. They should have abandoned it, but they persisted with it, because they have this blinkered mentality of, we've done this thing, we need to see it through. I mean, when it came to class design, they had to, and that was another one where they only gave a small amount of development time in their plan for the expansion and then had to give a lot more. Well, they couldn't exactly abandon that. They had to do that, but they didn't have to mess about with the GCD changes. There was an awful lot of other things they didn't have to mess about with as well. The slowdown, for example, there was a comment about that, about slowing the game down. Well, that's going to come later on anyway. That was another one which they didn't have to do. But that's for another reason. But in terms of the last point, it says the system has defeated itself with every fix they try out. Well, that's another thing, unfortunately, they try and do. They're constantly doing this, where they just basically try and put sticking plasters over cracks. And it doesn't really... and I can understand it if you're doing it for the short term with the very genuine intention of applying a longer term fix later on, but they often don't. They're very short-termism, the way the development cycles are set up. They do a thing just to get it fixed there and then. They don't intend to come back later on and do it. That's never been my experience. And that's going way back as well. That's not just talking about the last few years. I think that's going way back. They do what they can to paper over a crack, and then they just leave it in the assumption that crack's not going to be included in the next expansion. That's just, it is unfortunate. And I agree they should completely change the way they approach certain things, and should absolutely, if all of a sudden something's going to take a lot more time to get right than they initially planned for, they should give serious consideration to much earlier on in the process, just abandoning it, quitting while you're behind, and doing something else and going in another direction. I totally agree with that concept, but they don't. And once it's gone live, it makes it much harder. If they won't do it during the alpha and beta cycles, they're not going to do it during live. Next one. So it says, hope you all remember that the biggest issue has come from the Diablo RNG approach that is in the game, that is thanks to the new team that came from that title. Now, I can't speak too much about specifics of Diablo, because although I've played it through, it's a little bit, I've not really played it that much. But it was noticeable in Legion, of course, that the RNG changed. Obviously, there's always RNG in a game like this. In any sort of role-playing game, there is some RNG. There's RNG in particular with an MMO or any computer game, is mostly in terms of the gear you acquire. That being said, the nature of that RNG did change significantly in Legion. Now, the way I always apply it mathematically is to say, in terms of the two types of RNG that I categorize it as, there's the type of RNG which is normally distributed, which basically bell curve, but it's distributed around an individual player. So in other words, your luck is really dependent on, are you going to get your gear quickly or a few weeks later? Tier gear was a classic example. Some people would get their 4 set bonus in the first week. Sometimes it would take a few weeks. But if you're a regular raider, you would get it. You wouldn't be there at the end of the tier still without your set bonuses. You might be there without your Super Titan Forge thing. But that's part of the other type of RNG, which is where it is still normally distributed, but around the entire population. So that means they can point to it and say, well, it's all normally distributed. There's some people that are not very lucky. There's some people that are very lucky and so on. The problem is from an individual player's point of view, a customer of this game, they don't care about that. They don't care that if they're not getting good luck with it, someone else is. So, okay, so it all balances out. Karma, great. No, they don't give monkeys about that. They only care about how their character is developing, not others. And that's what Blizzard don't really seem to understand. The legendary drop, which of course was based on how legendaries dropped a long time ago. This isn't a new idea, but Amanthor's Vision was a classic example. If it were the case that you would eventually get it, then they'd have probably got away with it a bit more. I say a bit more because they wouldn't have totally got away with it, because you have to remember the actual epic trinkets, there was a lot of furore about that. Some people were getting it straight away. Some people, I didn't get my first trinket from Argus until I think it was like the 8th kill. So I already had a stack of upgrade things waiting to use it on. Or to use on it, I should say. And that was annoying. There were some people that took even longer. So there was, but at least that was a situation where you knew you would get it. The problem is I got it 2 months later, not a few weeks later. That was a problem there, I think. There's 2 types of RNG. If it's just the case that the luck simply depends on how early you're going to get certain things, within a reasonable amount of time scale, though, then that's okay. People will accept that. What people are much less likely to accept is where some people just don't get it at all. And Titan Forging does that. And I know that's not the reason for it. It has another purpose, which I'll go over in another comment later on. But it has the effect that some people will never get the, Warforged weapon, or some people will never get the, max item level chest, not chest so much, that's bad idea. Azerite gear now. But yeah, say legs. Legs have got a pretty good stat budget on them. Or trinket. Something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's... So, I agree, and there's... I think they've toned it down a little bit, but Titan Forging is still there. Obviously, the legendary system is gone, because that was another little one there. So, certain elements of that side of the RNG have gone, but they've still kept Titan Forging. And, of course, you could argue that Azerite gear from the Mythic Plus caches is now another example of that. Let's have a look. So, in terms of Titan Forging, again, speaking of that, says one person says, I killed an Ogre Rare on my Druid Inarathi, got on 390 belt, plus 50 Titan Forging. Of course, you'll be one of the few people in the world to get something up that way. But we always see it, don't we? It's like you will see at some point the totally bis item, the best trinket for a particular class, at the highest possible item level, and it'll be Raid Finder Titan Forge. These things happen very rarely. And of course, the reason they do it is just because they don't want people to ever have finished gearing. They want people to redo content. That's what it's in there for. But yeah, it's saying Ian is dedicated, but if you're dedicating your efforts to the wrong cause, it's still not a good thing. No, it's not. But as I kept saying about Ian Hazakostas, I don't believe that anyone who followed him would do a better job. I don't believe he's doing a good enough job, but I think I don't think it's down to one person. I think there's something bad with the whole structure. From the creative side of things, it all works pretty well. It's a creative team, but it's not disciplined. It's not very good at organising its priorities. And this is why, although we don't end up with a bad game out of it, I think people sometimes overblow it. We're critical of it because there are things that are not up to their standards. If this was a brand new MMO, it would probably be much better received because those expectations would be lower. But it's not. It's a game that has that history of excellence, and it's not quite meeting those standards of excellence, and that's, I think, why there is a lot of criticism. It's not an absolute scale we're talking about. It's like You know, the standard was very high and now it's not, and we don't understand why. It's not like the game is suddenly not making very much money. It's making loads of money. In fact, they keep telling us in their reports it's making more money than it's ever made. Because even though it may not have as many players, it's making more money out of the players it does have. So, now, on to another little, well, first of all, a little quibble of English, but then we'll get on to something a bit more important. So it says, blah, blah, blah. One area I disagree with, though, is your definition of constructive feedback. Again, I will point out here, it's not my definition of constructive feedback. I did add what I think is more constructive there. It says, I will use Path of Exile as an example, a company that for a long time was praised for its community engagement, though I can't speak to present day as I've not played in a while. On a podcast, Chris Wilson, the game developer, specifically said he does not want solutions to be offered by the community on features they don't like because they aren't game developers, so while their solutions may seem good, will undoubtedly have unforeseen effects on other aspects of the game that they can't account for because they're not game developers. Rather, what Chris would prefer would be to give precise feedback on what you don't like a particular feature so that devs know exactly how to fix the problem. Well, first of all so in terms of constructive feedback and what they're saying, which is a totally different thing. Basically, being constructive simply means trying to help. That's all it means. It's entirely, whether something's constructive or not is entirely down to the intention of the person saying it. Now, I argue that constructive feedback should identify a problem and then offer a solution. The reason I say that is not because the offering of the solution is essential to it being constructive. It's more that anyone can be critical of something and just throw something out. And it's not necessary. Someone identifying a problem in a very genuine way, it may be constructive. Someone else may identify a problem in a very trolly way, and it's not at all constructive. So the best way I always think for someone to ensure that what they're saying is constructive is to offer, and I mean a realistic solution. You know, the realistic solution is not, as we've sort of already seen with certain things, suggesting that Blizzard and sack half the development team and get a load of developers in. That's not realistic. Nor is it realistic to suggest they should suddenly reduce their profitability and pump more money into it. It'd be lovely if they did that, but we know they're a business and they're not going to. They will, like any business, try and maximize their profits. And the way you do that is by trying to get as much money out of the customers as possible and spending as least as possible. Why am I getting mixed up with simple English now? What am I doing? I've only just got up, sorry. As little as possible. That would be a better word. Gordon Bennett. On the product, on actually manufacturing it. But in terms of what the developer's saying here, because Blizzard have said similar things as well. He's saying they'd prefer it if you just identified the problem rather than offering a solution. Now, I'm totally convinced that all game developers would prefer that. The reason is not as they're saying there. The reason they're saying that is because it sounds plausible. Yes, it sounds plausible. Oh, you can't account for things because you're not a game developer. Horseshit. Yes, some people may offer up a solution that actually makes one thing better and another thing worse. Get that. Totally get that. But the games developers can see that, or they should see that, and just simply go, well, that's not a suitable suggestion then, is it? But to actually say they don't want suggestions is nothing to do with that. It's entirely down to the fact that, one, they don't want to be seen in taking ideas from the community, because then it's almost like, well, why are we paying you? You're supposed to be coming up with the ideas. And the other side of it is someone might come up with something very popular that they don't want to do for other reasons. I don't see it as a credible thing to say, we don't want you to offer solutions. They should absolutely encourage people to offer up solutions. They don't have to take them on. Much like when I ask for feedback on my channel, I don't have to take it on just because someone says so. And if it gets like 10 people or 100 people all commenting saying they agree with it, doesn't mean to say I have to do it, because I can understand, again, myself, what's realistic and what's not. But yeah, so that's what I would say on that. This idea that, oh, well, you're not taking things into account is very patronising. Also to say, oh, because you're not a game developer, you can't take these into account. We know from, I mean, I don't follow lots of other companies. I inevitably find, know little things about Blizzard developers. And an awful lot of Blizzard developers, including the chief, Ian Hazakostas himself, did not come from other games before they became game developers. He was I don't know what he was. He was legally trained. All I know is he was in the legal profession. Lawyer maybe, something like that. When he joined Blizzard, he was just a player of the game. So the idea that a player of the game can't come up with good solutions is nonsense. I know, for example, in World of Warcraft that players who are not themselves games developers in other companies do discuss things with Blizzard, and Blizzard take on board sometimes what they say, not enough. So that's a nonsense. What they're saying there is just coming up with something that sounds plausible at face value, but in actual fact, it's just them saying, we're not interested in your ideas. Because, it would attack their ego. Because Blizzard has done the same thing. In fact, Blizzard went one step further. They said they don't even want you to post feedback on their own forums. Ian Hazacosta said, we'd much rather you put it on Twitter. Yes, of course you do, because then it's not going to get any real discussion going. Next one. So, on to tank targets. Says, thank you for a reflective discussion on threat. One tip I learned from the podcast on the subject of dealing with skittish mechanic is to put focus on the tank and make the UI option to display the frame of the target of the focus. That way you will know which mob the tank will pull. That is an incredibly convoluted way of doing something quite simple, and then prevents you from using a focus macro later on if you need it. Now, I have to say, in Mythic Plus Dungeons, I can't really remember the last time I ever wanted to use a focus macro. It tends to be much more of a thing I've done in raids. But I wouldn't want to rule out the possibility. For example, I have macros for interrupts for a focus target. So if I'm targeting DPSing one target but need to interrupt another. Actually, I suppose Waycrest Manor might be a useful thing for that. Or you could just use a mouse over for it. Because sometimes you DPS in one mob but need to interrupt another with the Witches. The 3 Witches boss. But no, that is not... I would not recommend that way at all. That is nonsense. I can totally understand that, as you say there, you just pug a lot without voice comms. Get that. So I get the fact that what you really want to know is what the tank is DPSing. There are 2 better ways to do that. One way is, as the tank goes in, you could just target the tank and then press your assist button, which by default I think is F. It's F on mine anyway, but I can't remember if that's the default one or the one I made it. But I'm pretty sure that's the default one. Or, in case you think the tank might initially target one and then switch and focus on another one, you can just in your... Well, I use Elf UI. I can't remember anymore what default options are. But I'm going to guess this would be a default option as well. If it's not, we'll just get Elf UI or something. It's a very good UI add-on. And you could just in there have the tank target frames. It doesn't have to be a separate focus frame. It's there in there. And you can have the tank target frame as well. So you could have the tank and the tank's target without having to use a focus command, which then which occasionally will wipe itself anyway. You have to keep reapplying it. Okay, it's not the worst thing to have to reapply. But also, if there comes a situation where you would feel a focus macro would be useful for other things. And as I say, a classic use for a focus macro for a DPS is interrupting a particular target when you're going to be on something else. It prevents you doing that. It's much better just to have, if you want, the separate tank target because you can actually have that option. I would just use that. Using a focus macro for it, or a focus command. I wouldn't at all recommend that. Next one says Goblin Jump on Kel Jaden was the final nail for the Alliance for raiding purposes, I assume. I'm not sure, actually. It may be. I mean, obviously a lot was made of that. I don't necessarily know that a load of people went Horde as a result of that, because once it was done, you wouldn't necessarily think the same thing's going to happen again. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one, because my perception has been I've always wanted to play Alliance, really. If I have a realistic choice, I would play Alliance. I know I could because I'm casual now, but I'm playing with people I know, and they're Horde. But I did have to go to a Horde guild, at the end of WoD, I joined a Horde guild. Not because I wanted to, not because I was thinking, oh, do you know what, Horde are better, I'll just join them. Just because when I was applying for guilds, the only guilds at the level I was interested in were all of them 100% Horde. And when I went Horde at the end of the last expansion as well, it was the same thing. you know, the realistic prospects were all Horde. So that was it. But let's have a look at the situation now anyway. So because, you know, Blizzard now have their leaderboard. So this is what it's looking like at the moment for the Alliance. 7 Alliance guilds have killed Mythic Uldir. So you can see there, that's that. Now if we look at the Horde ones, I can't show them all, I'll just show the bottom ones. So there's 42. So nice little ratio there, 6-1 for Horde to Alliance at the moment. Of course, the higher up you go, the more disparity there is. It will be interesting to note how much later it takes the Alliance 100th Guild to get the achievement as compared to the 100th Horde Guild. Because remember, until both Alliance and Horde have filled up their 100, there's no cross-realm mythic. So yeah, at the moment, 1 in 7 guilds that's killed Mythic Uldir are Alliance only. But I will be particularly interested in, at the end of the tier, once the new raid comes out, I'll be interested in having a look. And I might not be able to look at this because the 100 will be rounded out. I'll be interested in knowing the total number, so I'll have to go to WoW Progress again probably. And to try and just work out how many Horde guilds will have killed it at that point and how many Alliance guilds. That will be quite telling. It may be that it is not a significantly worse ratio than it was before Kil'jaeden, because I'm not sure how much of an effect that Kil'jaeden thing had. I think it's just been quite bad for a very long time. And I think it just naturally gets worse because, you know, the people that I know here, they were Alliance and Legion, they changed to Horde just because they just accepted it was too difficult, because I was the recruitment officer. It was too difficult to recruit. Far too difficult. Way more chance to recruit Horde. And even recruiting Horde, I don't think recruiting for anyone has been that easy in Legion. I don't know what it's been like in BFA, but in Legion it was tough for everyone, but for Alliance particularly tough. Really was. And as a result of that, it means you'll get people who just choose to go Horde. From a player's point of view, there's a greater range of guilds. If they don't like the guild they're in, they're much more likely to be able to go to another guild without having to realm transfer. That's really important. And for the guilds, they've got a larger pool of players to recruit from. So I think that's what causes it, rather than any issue about racials. The racials, as far as I know now, might even favour Alliance. Who knows? Who cares? Doesn't matter, because that pool of players is just on the Horde now. All right, on to the next one. I've alluded to this one a couple of times already so far. It says, I'll be a bit smarter. Leave it as this is about what we do about Azerite gear from Mythic Plus dungeons, which Blizzard don't seem to be doing anything about. It says, leave it as a weekly cash drop, but increase chances for pieces you don't have. Or a Sanguicell vendor for an Azerite cash with a random Azerite piece, only purchasable once a week. Well, that's what I said, actually, in the video. I didn't say for Sanguicell, because that would exclude Mythic Plus Dungeoneers. I would say it should be some resource that people can get. But purchasable once a week is exactly what I said, so that people who just farm lots and lots of a particular resource can't just buy loads, but it's just limited. But in terms of this, leave it as a weekly cash drop, but increase chances for pieces you don't have. That's specifically for pieces you don't have. That would help you gear up more efficiently. Blizzard don't want that. They don't want that. They didn't bring in Titan Forging so you could gear more efficiently. You know, what they want you to get upgrades, preferably every week. They want us to get and only power upgrades. Remember, they have this thing in their heads where they don't understand that cosmetic rewards are a big draw. I keep saying this. I can only assume, because remember, like I've already said, a lot of these developers were just players of the game when WoW came out. They weren't games developers for anyone. Many of the most influential people were just players of the game. I can only assume that they were the most terrible loot whores, because they don't give any attention to cosmetic rewards, only power rewards. But yeah, they want us to have power rewards every single week. But they never want us to be max power. They always want us to feel that there's more that can be had. They want us to get upgrades, but they want us to also feel that there are further upgrades to come when they play the following week. that's how the whole system is set up now. There is no such thing as ever getting your bisque set, because it will never happen, because you might get individual bisque pieces, but you will not get them at the item level you want. Apart from, I suppose, the Azerite gear now, because that's sort of a little bit fixed at a certain point. So they're never going to allow us to gear more efficiently. They just want us to get upgrades each week. That's it. Now, the Azerite gear, okay, they've dropped the ball there, because they also don't want us to be pissed off about it. They want us to feel enthused by it, but we're not being, because there's certain groups of players that are doing high-end content that are not able to get their Azerite pieces several weeks in. And that's the real problem there. Right then. Oops, no, that's the same one back. Next one, it says, okay, to do with Azerite traits. It says, to be honest, alarm bells were ringing in early alpha when they didn't even have Azerite traits in it. I don't think they were even added until halfway through the beta, where everyone started pointing out these problems. Yeah, this was a problem, to be honest. There were traits data mined, but it was, I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was very late on that we even got Azerite gear. And then when we did, it all had the same traits on it. It was like just one out of thing. And then when they started putting more in, it was very late on. And it did, yes, it caused problems, because they can tell us how they intend the system to work. But whenever they do that, it's all very aspirational. What we need to know is how it's actually going to work. And we didn't find that out till very late on. But even when we did, we really didn't think that they were going to make as much of a mess of tuning, because ultimately it's about tuning that's the biggest problem. When it comes to the traits themselves, yes, some people are complaining that some of them are a bit more like boring because they don't really change gameplay. Well, that was the case for the artifact traits in Legion, and perfectly sensible. You can't have as many traits as there are, all of them affecting your gameplay. People will get into a right muddle, and it would actually be impossible. If they even tried that, we could have said months ago, impossible to tune. The problem is that what they've released is still impossible to tune. I wouldn't mind as much, even that, personally, some people would. I wouldn't mind as much if at least they understood that it was impossible to tune. Because then it's like, okay, it's impossible to tune. What do we do? Because people keep saying, oh, they should just abandon the whole project. They will never abandon the Azerite system now. They will maybe try and chip away at some of the worst features of it and get rid. Like I was saying, some of the worst Azerite traits, what they could do, the ones that have proved the most problematic, they could just for 8.1 quietly remove them when they add new ones in, because they're going to add new ones in anyway, and it makes sense to get rid of some older ones. They could just get rid of some of the more problematic ones, but the system itself will still not be great. But what they could do, if they at least acknowledge that they're not going to be able to tune them, just to say that, and just to have some awareness of which traits are going to be the best, and just to make sure that those traits are on the pieces that drop from, say, in a raid, the toughest bosses, or, the traits that are going to basically go to the people who are doing the hardest content, at least. Just some acknowledgement of which are the best ones. Because otherwise, it's a bit like relics in Legion, where you had traits on them, and some people had their BIS traits, in that raid, and some people, their BIS traits wouldn't drop from any of the relics in that raid. You had to be lucky from Mythic Plus dungeons, and that was not very satisfactory, because Blizzard insisted that all the traits were of equal value, when they weren't. So I think sometimes what causes a big problem, like I say, is the fact that they think they can tune them, and they can't. And if they just acknowledge that they can't, and just have some awareness of which ones are going to be best, and design where they are, design the actual pieces, and in terms of which traits they have, to take account of that, so that everyone can get, that's doing the tough content can get their BIS traits, the traits that are going to be more useful to them, the ones they're going to want. You shouldn't have a situation where a Mythic Raider is reliant upon Mythic Plus dungeons for their BIS traits. Or vice versa, come to that. Okay, actually, just before I do that, I'm just going to try and find where that number 1 went missing. There it is. Okay, where's that going? Where? Oh, I'm making a right mess of this, sorry. This is because I lost a comment earlier. Let's just put this here. I can't count. I missed out number 1. So, this is about classes and zones, really. It says, honestly, I want classes to be faster paced again. Still paying attention to the medium, but I will not resub until classes are fun again and leveling isn't so bothersome. Seriously, the quest system is outdated and so slow. I have heirlooms in all slots and I'm being punished for trying to level faster, so I'm not stuck in content I've already done by forcing me to stay in that content instead of getting to the new areas. There is no socialising in the old areas. They are effectively dead zones because no one interacts. Well, this is true. So 2 things first, I would say, because I agree with both of these things. So the faster classes thing, this is, again, it's a wider issue with Blizzard doing things here. Particularly coming from a Ret Paladin point of view, I don't actually mind the reduction in the downtime, so to speak, the increased downtime. But a lot of players do. A lot of players were attracted to Ret Paladins because of the very fast, action-packed rotation. It's very quick. You don't very often get downtime. Now, that can be a pain in the arse because when you have to move away from a boss or something like that, it means you're losing massive amounts of damage. Huge amounts of damage. And you still are compared to a lot of other classes. But what I would say from Blizzard's point of view is they shouldn't have done it for this reason. One, they'll always say with things like this, by the way, oh, we can never please everyone. No, you can't. But if you've got a situation where where changing a thing is going to annoy a lot of people and it's not going to please others, why are you doing it? No one was asking for these classes to have their rotation slowed down. No one was asking for more downtime. So straight away, making this change, you don't have a pool of players that are going to be happy with what you're doing, but you do know you've got a right load of players who are going to be unhappy, who made it very, very clear when the idea was even broached that they were going to be very unhappy. And that's what annoys me about it. And it goes back to this arrogance I was talking about with class developers, that they know what's best instead of listening to their customers. Yes, sometimes the customers will ask for things that are not realistic. Sure. But this wasn't one of those situations, and there's many examples where it's not one of these situations. If ever you are going to make a change that is not going to be pleasing a whole load of your player base, and it's going to piss others off, to the point, and when it's a clash, you've got to be particularly careful, because like I always say, there's different pieces of content that are developed. Not everyone does any particular piece of content, but what everyone does have is a class. So the class philosophy has to be right. If you make a class unenjoyable for someone to play, you have to be quite sure that you are going to delight more players than you piss off. Because if you don't, you are potentially having a net loss of players. Because some players will just straight up stop playing the game if they do not like their class anymore. Because there may not be another one that they enjoy. And it may be that the class is, their enjoyment of the game is through their own character. So it's a stupid thing to do, I think. Now, when it comes to the zones, again, this is something I've talked about. When scaling came in, that's a big improvement, but I said at the time what they really should do, and I know people disagree with me on this one. So this is at least a situation where Blizzard knew whatever they did, they were going to delight some people and annoy others, and maybe they actually made the right decision on this one in terms of, from a democratic point of view, I don't know. All I do know is I would have much preferred it if there was total scaling in there. Just like Elder Scrolls Online, you complete scale, you just go where you want, when you want. I did say as a compromise, maybe, for example, now we're in BFA, maybe they make the level 1 to 110 totally scalable, but from 110 to 120 you have to do the new zones. That way you definitely have to do the new storylines. That's okay, that would be a compromise. So for the latest expansion, the current content, where the zones are not going to be dead, that you have that situation. Whereas with this one, I mean, there's two aspects to leveling that I don't like in WoW. And the fact that it is all dead and it doesn't feel like a living world is at the part of both of them. One, you can't go where you want. You've got more freedom than we used to have, but it's still not enough. And secondly, it takes too long. We are in dead zones for too long. We're playing a single player game for too long. And that's, so that is an issue there. But, Blizzard do their things. They carry on doing their things, really, which is unfortunate. Now, where was next? There's a bit of a science one now. This may take a little going through. So, it says physics stuff. You could do a great speculation just based on that cosmology illustration in Chronicle. You know the one which has the various, I know, with the various elements, fell, arcane, life, death, etc. Yes. You seem to be one of the few people who take Blizz literally when they say light and void are the fundamental forces and types of matter. Well, they do say that in there. As in, if they're the fundamental ones, then everything else has to be built from them. Well, again, Blizzard say that. I mean, if I'm one of the few saying that, then I'm one of the few who's actually read the bloody book, which I don't believe, because it makes it quite clear in that. It says some suggestions. Light and void, in what sense are they like matter and antimatter? Not at all. Not at all. I don't think there's any suggestion they are to... Apart from anything else, they certainly don't annihilate. I'll read the whole thing, actually, because I might end up repeating. So let's just read the whole thing, then we'll come back to it. It says, arcane being tied to order and fell to disorder, can this be linked to entropy in some way? Light as the one truth and void as 1,000 possible truths. Can they be compared to particle versus wave in quantum mechanics? I know that fantasy goes a lot by the a wizard did it principle. Yes, I have to use that phrase a lot. I'm struck by the fact that Blizz seem to want to frame their magic as well as cosmology, laws of nature in a very scientifically influenced manner. That's why I'm not letting this topic go. About light and void, something I'm curious about is this. If they repel, annihilate each other, how do they also make up all other forces of matter? Is there some force that can bind them into some sort of system like atom molecule, where they're kept close to each other but not close enough to repel and annihilate? Just from the point of view that everything in the universe, in the WoW universe, is supposed to be a combination of light and void, and only the light is pure light and only the void is pure void. Everything else is a mixture of light and void. So even like death, the realm of death magic, necromancy, we associate much more with the void. It still has light to it as well, which is why, for example, I have no issue with undead paladins. But it's not necessarily equal amounts. So for the stuff that's at the bottom, I should have brought up the image, but I didn't, sorry. The stuff that's at the bottom that has, say, necromantic magic there, being closer to the void, probably has more of a void element to it, but it still has some light. They do say that. They shadow and light, not in equal parts, but everything is some combination of the two. And the fact that everything is some combination of the two makes it unlikely that we see them as matter and antimatter in that normal sense. In terms of arcane being tied to order and fell to disorder, can this be linked to entropy in some way? Possibly because, well, through Sargeras, of course, he was on the order side because Titans are arcane, and he sort of effectively became more fell, didn't he? Well, he did become a being of fell. So it could be argued that it's a little bit like a Naru, maybe, a being of the light, when it dies, goes to becoming a being of shadow, which is something in itself which is really perplexing. Trying to think through some of these may well be routes to madness as well, because here's the thing about this. I think you're quite right in that sometimes the way they try and design the cosmology of their world, they try and apply some scientific principles. I'm not totally convinced that anyone who has any hand in it knows the first thing about science, though. I think maybe they've potentially read a bit of Brief History of Time and they've taken things from there that they've not fully understood. Maybe. Because there's so many things. Like, how does a Naru, which is supposed to be a being of pure light, one of the few things that isn't a combination, change into pure shadow? And then when you do another thing to it, cleanse it, refresh it, changes back to pure light. That's weird. That's almost like, we're getting into the realms, we talk about quantum mechanics here, we're getting into the realms of quantum numbers there, where you could change some of them and it switches it from light to shadow. And maybe all matter in the universe, therefore, the World of Warcraft universe, has the potential. It's made of the same stuff that all, there's some fundamental particle that everything is made of light and shadow, and it's really just about their quantum numbers that determines whether they're light or shadow. In other words, in theory, you could turn something from light to shadow, because that happens with Naru. That would potentially be part of the explanation for why the Void want to corrupt a Titan. They're not able to do it when they're fully formed, but when they're in their nascent form. So you're talking about a being that is a combination of light and shadow. Maybe all they do is switch the light part of them into shadow, and then you've got a being of pure shadow, a Titan of pure shadow. And maybe they say that they can use that to destroy the universe. I don't know. That's just a bit weird. I still haven't thought that one through. I could work out how maybe such a being could turn more of the universe into shadow if it had the ability to flip light particles, you know, so that it had the numbers for shadow. I don't know. There's an awful lot of things you can try and go down, but you just end up going down the rabbit hole, because then there's other things that just don't make sense. I still don't get how you're supposed to be able to flick it like that, because it's only with Naru and maybe Titans, because there's a suggestion you can do it with Titans where that happens. You don't really get other situations where you can change, say, a Void Lord or an old god into a being of light. Maybe, because that would have been something I'd have thought about. If I was thinking through this and trying to make sense of their own cosmology, I would say, okay, so if you can turn light particles into shadow and then back again, because we know that Naru can be switched back to the light, because they did that in WoD. If you can do that, then why isn't the way we can deal with... Or maybe that is it. Maybe that's what they're going to do. I just had a thought. Okay. So, obviously we know in this expansion we're basically going to be tackling old gods. Uldir is a facility designed to allow us to change old, or to defeat old gods, kill them effectively, without harming Azeroth. What if the way that is done is by turning them from beings of shadow to beings of light? That might be possible. Maybe that's how it's done. Not that necessarily beings of the light would be any friendlier, because we already know from Zera's antics in Legion, you know, even though the Chronicles describes these beings of the light, Naru, as benevolent, we're now starting to see them as maybe they're just friendlier. But in actual fact, they have their own, you know, politics as well. They have their own designs, and they will use us as much as anyone else. And a Titan is not supposed to be a being of the light. It's arcane. In fact, it's closer, because that's the thing that always weirded me out on that diagram as well. Arcane, assuming like their relative positions is supposed to mean something, arcane, which is Titans, are closer to the shadow than the light, and demons are closer to the light than to shadow. Not that we necessarily have to associate demons very much with the Void, other than the fact that warlocks, because they can summon demons, and they can also summon Void Gimps. But anyway, so many things in potential could talk about. Maybe I'll think of something when I've got half term or something like that. We shall see. Right, another one. Just a little bit of fun with this one. This is not me having a pop at anyone. So what someone said says mobile Alabama is pronounced, because I was saying about in Britain mobile on its own we would pronounce as mobile. That's why I said mobile. But in America, often it's pronounced mobile, like mobile phone. But automobile or Batmobile, I think both countries just pronounce it mobile. So someone's saying there in Alabama it's pronounced like that, so it's pronounced mobile in Alabama. It says us Americans are silly words. No. You don't get to say that. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Place names sometimes are pronounced differently to how you might expect. I think in Britain we can take the biscuit with this one. Wales in particular. So here is the name of a place in Wales. Now, it's not an ancient name where it's just someone was silly back in, you know, Celtic days. This is quite a recent one. Someone basically deliberately came up with this place name just to be an arse, really. They wanted their railway station to be at a place with the longest name in, like, Britain at least. So they did it deliberately, just to be an arsehole. They maybe didn't like railway announcers or something, I don't know. Now, here's what we're going to do with this. I am going to attempt to read. I've got, obviously, it's something to read from that's supposed to tell me, how it's supposed to be pronounced. And then I'll play an audio clip I found of someone actually pronouncing it. So, this is how it's supposed to be pronounced. Right, this is horrible, by the way. I had a couple of practices at this and I made a right arse of it. Here we go. Flan via pwthel gwyn gichel go ge I go tren drob wthel andus ilio go. That's my best attempt at it. What we'll do, though, is I will play you an audio of someone actually pronouncing it. It's not the greatest audio quality, I have to say.
Chanveir puchvingech gogerish vindrobo chantisilio go.
So yeah, I think Mobile, Alabama is pretty tame compared with some of the places we've got in Britain, I think you'll find. And I'll leave it there for this week. Thanks for joining. If you've been making it this far, you must have liked it, I hope. So don't forget to click the like button if you have, subscribe for further content. Comments down below, including where the mailbox is. Share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.